Police and witnesses say more than 100 teenagers launched a coordinated attack on downtown Philadelphia on Tuesday night, where they looted and vandalized over a dozen retail storefronts. According to Philly police, stores included Foot Locker, Lululemon, and Apple, which were ransacked in quick succession at around 8 p.m. Eastern. So far, over 50 arrests have been made, including 49 adults and 3 juveniles.
Meanwhile, earlier this week, retail giant Target announced it would be closing 9 stores in 4 states, citing organized retail crime. The stores facing closure are located in New York City, Seattle, California, and Portland, Oregon. However, just this week, a major study released by the National Retail Federation finds that the effect of theft on retailers' bottom lines is largely in line with what it has been in past years. One Twitter user noted a few months ago, someone pointed out that we're closing due to shoplifting sounds much better to shareholders than we're closing because we can't compete. And the whole last year of media frenzy made so much more sense after that. So let's start with the Philly story. My understanding is that these events are following a judge who earlier this week dismissed charges against a police officer who shot someone who was erratically driving point blank through their window moments after rising on the scene, and what many consider to be a disproportionate use of force that resulted in this 27-year-old named Eddie Irizarry dying. That being said, I mean, obviously, looting is illegal and wrong. I think there was a question about whether or not there are various media narratives that are being used to fuel various agendas, either by the corporations that own these stores, who would prefer a narrative about how they have to go out of business because of looting as opposed to an inability to profit, and another narrative that is helpful to those who want to increase funding to the police, that if people believe that they're in a lawless environment, obviously we can have even more of our already bloated police budgets dominating the overall municipal spending. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think there's an interesting difference between perhaps what is being described in the tweet that you read off, in terms of shrink from theft being very similar to past years. I think the fundamental difference with the type of violence that we're seeing in 2023 is that it's coordinated and organized. We're seeing more smash and grabs than shoplifting. And that's not just a profitability problem, but it's a problem for the safety of the people who are actually working in these stores. And it's a problem with the safety of the people who are shopping and the people who are nearby in these areas. Same thing with this looting question. This is an action that fundamentally has violent undertones to it, if not direct violence. And so for me, this is more of a public safety issue than a profitability issue for these businesses. Now, some of them may very well be using this as an excuse to justify losses. There's no question that e-tail is taking out department stores and had been well before some of this crime has been on the rise. But you see this in connection, too, with the carjackings that have been taking place, up 300% in D.C., for example, where these young people in particular are engaging in crime more frequently, and they're engaging in crime that is what we would typically describe as nonviolent, but they're doing it in more violent ways. So there's more armed carjackings, there's more looting as opposed to shoplifting, for example.
Well, to your point about the safety of people who work in the store, I take that very seriously. But in the story that we're talking about right now, all of these shops were burglarized per reporting, I'm reading from NBC now, between 12:10 a.m. and 2:03 a.m. So these were after store hours. And while that may be an issue in other circumstances, certainly the safety of employees was an issue when we were talking about all of the Target protests over their choice to sell LGBTQ-related gear. And you had a number of people entering those stores and harassing and then sometimes getting in physical confrontations with workers at the Target. That doesn't seem to be the instance here. And that's not to minimize the seriousness of obviously stealing, but this doesn't seem to be an interpersonal safety issue or one in which the employees are being targeted in any way. I do, look, I have no interest in saying it's okay to steal. It obviously isn't. But I do think there's a question to be asked about why there's an emphasis on certain kind of stories and not others. For example, the most common type of threat in America, and Google it, this is undisputed, the most common type of threat in terms of numbers of dollars stolen is wage theft. Wage theft. And some of the companies that engage most in wage theft, like Walmart, are the ones that are constantly going to the press about stories about how they can't keep their stores open and how they're losing profits and how we live in a lawless hellscape because of all of the theft from their stores. Well, the employees of Walmart are some of the biggest welfare recipients in the United States of America. Our government is subsidizing the salaries of people who work at stores owned by the richest people in the country who won't pay their people a living wage. And instead of having a narrative about why one of the country's biggest employers can't treat its employees right and are literally stealing wages from their employees in all of these instances, we're having a media frenzy about a group of 50, however many kids it was, 52 who were arrested on Tuesday night, 100 kids, or young people, whomever they were, who did a bad thing, but at a scale that is dwarfed by what these major corporations are doing in tandem with law enforcement, who again precipitated, it seems, some of this activity earlier this week, because there was a police shooting of a driver through the window of his car in a claim of self-defense, and then a criminal justice system that decided not to press charges against the police officer. Does that feel at all dissonant to you? The focus of what this unholy union that seems to be forming between the police state, which is invented with the sole purpose, the primary purpose of protecting property, and these property owners, these corporations, who are basically using the tax-funded police state to make sure that what is protected is property at all costs, and absolutely no public attention or moral attention paid to all of the theft that is happening from the very communities who are participating in some of this lawless behavior.
I think we have to consider, though, that it's not just about protecting corporate profits. The other issue that comes along with these types of very public and large displays of lawlessness is the potential for cities to fall into a doom loop. And this is what we've been seeing in San Francisco. When you have a smash and grab incident like this, or a looting incident, your point's well taken that it happened after hours. There are plenty of cases in the past couple of years where they were doing it in broad daylight, particularly over in Old Town Alexandria, pretty close to where we are now in downtown DC. But when people see that, people don't want to return to the office, they don't want to shop downtown, and these cities quickly become ghost towns. And that's a problem not just for corporations, it's a problem for small businesses, it's a problem for restaurants that are independently owned, it's a problem for people who live in those areas and who no longer feel safe just even stepping outside of their own home to walk their dogs because there's people throwing bricks at babies in strollers. I mean, all kinds of horrific incidents. So, I mean, your point is well taken. Wage theft is an issue. Certainly, it pretty much always has been.
It's the number one theft issue in the country. It always has been. And
but the reason this story is getting attention now is because it's a broader trend of a rise in violent crime throughout our nation's cities and a reduction of people actually living in those cities due to a multitude of reasons, whether it's the lack of people wanting to go back to the office and work in person, or the utter closure of upwards of 70% of businesses due to the lingering effects of the pandemic and crime.
I do want to address your doom spiral point. I will say first, I just want to put a number on it. Workers in the U.S. have an estimated $50 billion stolen from them every year. So that's a trend if I ever saw one. And I don't mean to be shoehorning that into this segment, but we don't do. I mean, media at large tends not to do just random segments on wage theft because it is so pervasive. It's like the air that we breathe. It doesn't seem notable. It's uninterrupted, so it doesn't seem like time-pegged and newsworthy. But I do take your point. There is a doom spiral in some of these cities like San Francisco. But I would ask you the question of whether or not small businesses, the people that used to make that city one of the most colorful, hippie haven where so many of our artists that we're so proud of. I was just in Cleveland at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they have a whole Haight-Ashbury section about all of the culture that used to come out of San Francisco. Isn't there a relationship between the fact that housing prices have been driven up by the extreme concentration of wealth that has been brought by the tech industry, which has forced out locals, it's forced out small businesses who can't afford retail spaces. It is a hellscape that's created in part because the only people who can afford property in these locations, you've seen it, every downtown is now just a collection of CVS's and banks. And they're all in the beautiful old buildings that used to be libraries and banks. It's always been banks. But that the Carnegies and all of these billionaires of old used to build in the public interest in many instances, and who now the only people who can afford the rent are these huge conglomerates who are, I'm sorry, investing in a lot of these public narratives about theft and the fact that police need to be more funded because it's all one giant cycle. You know, a fire engine drove by me as I was walking home yesterday. And I smiled and, you know, like nodded to the guys in the truck. And I was thinking about how everyone loves firemen and how it's very mixed feelings on police. And why that is. It's not that people just woke up one day and said, I hate service providers, or I hate when the government puts money behind something. Like, no, we have a sense of who is acting in our interest and as members of the public, but who seems to always be protecting folks that aren't us. And I would just put out there that people should consider the relationship between the police state, the stories that we're getting about burglary, and the role that it serves for corporations who are able to attribute any number of failures, despite, as I read earlier, their profits being stable. But being able to sell any kind of failures, store closures, et cetera, on something other than their own financial malfeasance or bad luck in the markets.
I want to go back to your first point, which was about the driving out of small businesses and locals from cities. And your point is well taken. One of my biggest criticisms during the pandemic with the lockdowns was you had these major corporations pushing them, and nobody was talking about the fact, I mean, a few people were, but not many were talking about the fact that it's really convenient for them to push lockdowns because those overwhelmingly hurt small businesses that couldn't easily make the transition to e-tail and really required foot traffic in order to survive. Places like Amazon and Macy's and Bloomingdale's and all of these department stores were already killing it in the e-tail game. And so they absolutely do support policies that hurt their small competition and their local competition. And I want to revive Main Street. I want to revive local communities and the civic ties that bring people who own small businesses together with locals. And housing policy is going to be a part of that conversation, obviously.
And to your point, a huge percentage, I couldn't find the number when I Googled just now, but of the PPP loans went to the top, most wealthiest and biggest businesses.
Who could afford to pay their employees even with the shutdown, whereas the small
and then
businesses
also
couldn't.
who didn't use the funds the way they were supposed to use them. I have family members who are small business owners who tried to get PPP loans, and they were gone. If you didn't have the connections to take advantage of those loans, you didn't get them. So it became a gift to the people who didn't need it. I completely agree. So I mean, hopefully there's some gains to trade here. There's some possibility for agreement on this particular issue. The Hill has reached out to the Philadelphia Police Department for comment, and we'll be sure to cover any updates here. But until then, that does it for us on Rising today. Amber, it really was a pleasure sitting next to you today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, come back tomorrow, and you can see Jessica Burbank on Rising Friday.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.